Story 1. The Vanishing of Lars Mittank. In late June of 2014, a 28-year-old German man by the name of Lars Mittank took a vacation to the Bulgarian seaside resort of Golden Sands. Popular with tourists from all over Europe, Golden Sands is a major resort town on the northern Bulgarian Black Sea coast, adjacent to a national park of the same name in the municipality of Varna. Located just over 15 kilometers north of downtown Varna, it is virtually connected to the city by a continuous swath of resorts and villa communities. On the 6th of July, Lars and his group of friends found themselves in a disagreement with another group of young German men in a local bar. Lars and his companions were fans of the German football team Werder Bremen, while the opposing group were Bayern Munich supporters. There was a rather high-profile rivalry between the two football clubs, and the playful disagreement soon descended into a violent confrontation, when one member of each group began pushing and shoving each other. The fight between the two of them quickly became a full-on bar brawl between the two groups. Chairs and bottles were thrown, pool cues were used as weapons, and in the fray, Mittank suffered a ruptured eardrum from a particularly vicious strike. Mittank was forced to visit the local doctor to have his head examined. It was discovered that the injury was a particularly nasty one that came with a rather high risk of internal infection. So the doctor prescribed a course of the antibiotic cefuroxime and advised Lars not to fly for the next couple of weeks, as it would risk seriously exacerbating the injury and cause a grievous amount of pain. He would also require another examination at the Bulgarian hospital in the coming weeks in order to ensure the wound was properly on the mend. This severely interfered with Lars and his friends' travel plans, but Lars was not reckless enough to actually disobey the doctor's orders, and so arrangements were made for him to fly back to Germany at a later date than was originally intended. Lars's friends insisted that they would stay with him if he needed them to, but he assured them that he would be perfectly fine on his own. Besides, a forced holiday extension wasn't the worst fate a young man could wish to endure. And so Lars stayed in Bulgaria while his friends drove to the airport and flew back to Germany. He took a taxi back to the Hotel Color Varna, making reservations that would cover his recuperation period, then tried to spend the next few days relaxing and healing from his particularly nasty wound. But just a day after his friends left him behind in Bulgaria, Lars began to act very oddly indeed. His bizarre and erratic behavior was captured by the hotel's closed-circuit television security cameras. He ran around the hotel, looking over his shoulder, accusing staff and guests alike of plotting against him. A few of those encounters almost turned violent, and on more than one occasion, the hotel staff threatened to call the police. Finally, once Lars's behavior had become unbearable, the hotel staff asked him to gather his belongings and leave, as such violent outbursts were strictly against hotel policy and could no longer be tolerated. But before he checked out of the hotel, Lars made a call to his mother back in Germany. She later stated that he seemed extremely upset and told her in hushed tones that 4 German men, possibly the same as the friend group he fought with in the bar that day, were coming to kill him. He told her that he had made a significant withdrawal of cash to live off of, and that she should cancel his credit cards. When she asked why, Lars told her that the men could use them to track his movements. Where he got such an idea is a mystery, but he seemed very, very insistent that this was the case. We know that on the 8th of July, Lars Mittank traveled to Varna airport in an attempt to travel back home to Germany against the doctor's wishes. He attempted to purchase a ticket on a flight back home, but after looking around the airport and apparently seeing something, he became so flustered and frightened that he abandoned the attempt altogether. Lars then sought out a medical services area of the airport, although it is clear that he did not ask for any medical attention and would not tell those inside why he wished to remain there. They later confirmed that he seemed jumpy and paranoid, as if he was hiding from someone that was hunting him. About 45 minutes after originally taking shelter in the medical services area, the airport's CCTV cameras captured some kind of construction worker making their way over to the medical area. This seems to have triggered Lars into rushing out of the airport, having abandoned his backpack and luggage altogether. More CCTV footage shows Lars running across a two-lane highway, dodging speeding vehicles as he does so, before reaching a large fence. Lars scaled the fence with frightening strength and speed, then sprinted full pelt across a meadow before disappearing into a field of sunflowers with a set of deep woods beyond them. Police investigated the incident thoroughly but found no evidence that Lars was being followed by anyone. They even contacted the group Lars's friends had fought with, but they all had alibis that confirmed that they were nowhere near the airport on the day of Lars's disappearance. Many theories about what happened are all over the internet. Some theories believe that he was being used as a drug mule. Some believe that he suffered a psychotic episode. Only two things are completely certain regarding this behavior: an unexplainable incident. The first is that Lars did not suffer from any form of mental illness. The second is that Lars was never seen again, anywhere, or by anyone. Story 2. The Vampire Scoop. Susan Walsh's last story. Susan Walsh was an investigative journalist who conducted the majority of her work in New York City. Born Susan Young on February 18th of 1960, she took the name Walsh after she married Mark Walsh, brother of the Eagles singer and guitarist Joe Walsh. Despite her relative success in the field of journalism, Susan Walsh had something of a troubled upbringing. While attending William Patterson University in her home state of New Jersey, Walsh often worked as a stripper or erotic dancer in order to help pay the hefty tuition fees required to continue her studies. But there are some who say that she only worked in such seedier lines of work in order to fund her habit of illegal drugs and alcohol, and those who knew her were only too familiar with her penchant for the party lifestyle. However, by the time she graduated in 1984, Walsh insisted she was clean and sober, ready to kick-start her professional life as a journalist. And perhaps it was her affinity with the darker, more sordid side of life that made Susan Walsh such an effective investigator into her chosen subjects. But it seems that it was such an effectiveness that led her to uncover something she shouldn't have, and may well have contributed to her untimely disappearance. Whilst working for the Greenwich Village-based alternative publication The Village Voice Susan Walsh heard an extremely disturbing rumor through the journalist grapevine. According to trusted sources, New York hospitalists were suffering from an unusual and frightening phenomenon. Human blood, used to replace that which its patients had lost through accidental or violent encounters, was somehow going missing. Susan's boss and mentor at The Village Voice a man named James Ridgway, had suggested she investigate the strange thefts, as it would make for a spine-tingling story indeed. But after she spent weeks cross-referencing tips on the phone with various contacts from all over the East Village, she went back to Ridgway with an explanation that seemed as ridiculous as it was unbelievable. Susan Walsh claimed that vampires were to blame for the stealing of the hospital's blood. Walsh claimed that a small coven of vampires, first content to drink each other's blood in dark occult rituals that took place in cramped, dingy apartments after sundown, had taken to stealing it in bulk from the city's hospitals. Ridgway read Walsh's initial report with one major concern. Given its fantastical conclusion, he was deeply suspicious that Walsh had slipped back into her old pattern of addiction and abuse. He could think of no other reason why she could have come up with such a bizarre theory, when there were many other, much more rational explanations. It ran like a bad horror movie, he later said. I was hoping for a credible scoop, but I was only disappointed. She got totally absorbed with the vampire thing, the theories, the energy flows. The article she wrote wasn't very astute. He asked Susan Walsh to rewrite the article and to reconsider her theories regarding vampirism, but she was insistent that she was onto something and promised to better explain her theories in a later article she would present to Ridgway for his perusal. This is what she found. At the time that Susan Walsh disappeared, New York City had the largest Dracula fan club in the world, numbering over 5,000 members. They had a vampire museum, a 22-year-old vampire research center, and even an after-midnight cable talk show for those with a fascination for the fanged bloodsuckers said to stalk the streets of New York after dark. vampire-themed nightclubs, and even a vampire-inspired music scene may have given the subject a surface layer of whimsical innocence, but Walsh found that the deeper she dug into the city's underground vampire scene, the more dark and disturbing it became. A journalist's contact of hers had put her in touch with a woman who owned a shop in the East Village, a place that sold glazed skulls, old clothes, occult books, capes, and coffin-shaped jewels. Walsh said she descended a staircase in an abandoned basement theater, a place where incense hung heavy in the air, and the decor was an invariable jet black. There she met a woman who claimed she was the witch of the East Village and who sold all manner of products to the vampire cult that lurked among the shadowy underbelly of New York City. She stocked their pewter blood vials and tiny ceremonial knives used for breaking the skin of those they wished to feed on. Walsh was told that she was wasting her time looking for the vampire cult during the daytime, and that, although they were obviously not genuine immortal, bat-morphing kind of vampires, they were just as dangerous as their fictional counterparts. Walsh said that she was gripped with a queasy anxiety as she was told that this underground vampire cult did indeed kill people to get their blood fix, and that they had contacts at various hospitals around the city that could acquire fresh blood for them, for a price, of course. After all, in New York City, it's frighteningly easy to simply up and disappear. Walsh later told her boss of how the witch of the East Village had put her in touch with a young man claiming to have intimate connections with the vampire cult. He was from California and claimed to have a fang-making business that was frequently patronized by members of the cult. He also said he ran a vampire networking service that put curious people in touch with the cult, but only after they were thoroughly vetted. He told Walsh that they were fashion vampires, those that simply masqueraded in gothic clothing while listening to dark music, but that there were also real vampires, and transcending into one was a long and difficult process. When she asked the young man about the culture of blood drinking that was prevalent among the cult, she was told that he had indeed tried it on a few occasions, drinking a few ounces each time. He explained in deadly seriousness that it was an overwhelming sensation, almost like taking ecstasy, and a deeply sensual experience. He claimed it was like a very special kind of wine when you sip, and that you can taste a person's lifestyle in their blood, as well as things like how old they were or what ethnicity they belonged to. He also explained that the vampire cult was very serious and professional, how they were tested for HIV every month or so, and that the New York cult had connections with other such organizations in Philadelphia, Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, and Los Angeles. Their members included a Catholic priest, 2 pastors, lawyers, one of the top executives in Citibank, Republican politicians, as well as people who simply had a fetish for blood. He also confirmed that the cult did indeed have a contact working in a medical facility who tested bags of blood for infectious diseases before delivering them to the cult for large sums of cash. The young man went on to explain how the vampire cult would meet at some secretive location every few weeks to conduct a feeding ritual, and not always in some dark, subterranean hideaway. One week, they might meet in the private dining space of an Italian restaurant owned by someone sympathetic to their inclinations, or someone who would keep quiet for the right price. There was also a strict hierarchy among the cult members that kept discipline and secrecy intact. There were the transcended vampires, the de facto leaders of the cult, who in turn marshaled minions who would organize and facilitate the feasts. Finally, there was what's known as the herd, those who consented to be fed upon, who might also find themselves climbing the ranks of the cult in the hopes of one day becoming a fully fledged vampire. It was very similar to the BDSM community, he explained, in the sense that there are dominants and the submissives who serve them. It all seemed relatively innocent to Susan Walsh at first, but the young man went on to tell tales of a much darker scene that existed, or he had witnessed considerably more disturbing things. He told Susan that he had once attended what was known as a sanctuary feed, where he saw a young woman who had been rendered unconscious and strapped to a table with a series of tubes running out of her arms and legs. Those who attended the gathering could feed off her at will, and the young man said that he had no idea what became of the girl, but it was too much for him, and he'd left the event before it had finished. It was over the winter of 1995 to 1996 that Susan Walsh was researching the vampire piece for Asterisk, The Village Voice Asterisk. Around this time, friends and colleagues noticed that the pager she carried with her started going off a lot more, not just once or twice a day with messages from her boss at Asterisk, The Voice Asterisk, and other publications she wrote for, but every couple of minutes on some occasions. Walsh had always been popular with men and had made a considerable amount of money during her stripping days. Even after she divorced her husband Mark, he couldn't bring himself to move away from her and actually moved into the apartment below where she lived in New Jersey as a way of staying close to her. But whoever it was that was tailing her during that winter had set her on edge like nothing else had. She actually told some close friends that she was extremely worried about the situation, and on more than one occasion referred to him as her stalker, and was even too scared to reveal his actual identity. Even though it was obvious that she knew who it was, Walsh was even forced to visit the doctor over an apparent stomach ulcer brought on by the stress of her ordeal. Al Sullivan, the editor of the William Paterson University newspaper that Walsh wrote for back in her college days, was interviewed after her disappearance. He mentioned that Walsh showed a lot of promise, how she was always looking for a bigger story and digging deep into things that she was investigating. But he also mentioned how Walsh's charisma sometimes proved addictive to those who knew her. People don't stop falling in love with her, he explained. People get addicted to her. Her boyfriends won't leave her alone. She once told me that she was being stalked by an ex-lover that was in the CIA. On July 14, 1996, Susan Walsh's pager rang halfway through an interview she was conducting on a new project she was investigating. "Oh, that must be my stalker," she apparently joked. But 2 days later, she was declared missing. The vampire cult angle might seem ridiculous to some, but upon their initial investigation, the police department in Nutley, New Jersey, the place she disappeared, announced that they were indeed considering so-called vampire cults as the cause of her disappearance. But the causes of Susan's disappearance might well be rooted in the new project she had taken up, one that was also an investigation of New York's seedy underbelly. By 1996, Susan had become increasingly jaded with the stripping and erotic dancing she had once used to supplement her income and finance her education. Being on stage in front of so many people, being so intimately exposed, caused her to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. Then, after a while, the lusty gazes of her customers began to lose their appeal entirely. "I lie on the dressing room stools staring up at the ceiling," she once wrote of her time as a dancer, running images through my mind. Me taking a blade to a swollen member and slicing it up like a cucumber for a salad. She began to see this work as exploitative, cruel, and manipulative, and this set her on a crusade to expose human trafficking rings that provided New York's many peep shows and strip joints with their performers. And so, during mid-1996, Susan's research led her to a series of strip clubs that were apparently being run by the Russian mafia. She used her deep-rooted connections in the community she used to work in to organize secret meetings with many of the girls who worked in such places. She subsequently discovered that they were indeed being trafficked from the former Soviet Union into the United States, where they were forced to pay off their debts to those who had aided their migration by working as strippers, and worse, ladies of the night. In the chaos that had followed the fall of Russian communism, many young women had sought to flee the poverty of their homelands in favor of Western Europe or the United States, and the Russian mafia was only too glad to aid them, as well as exploit them for profit. The article that Susan put together on the subject was as revealing as it was skewering, and received a great deal of critical acclaim from all over the literary world. Suddenly, her name was well known all over the Western world as being one of the freshest, most exciting investigative journalists around. A documentary team from Germany traveled all the way to New York to seek her consultation and to interview her for a film they were making about Russian immigrants becoming go-go dancers. At the time of her disappearance, she was about to start work for the BBC on a similar program, who were also interested in the subject. But the dangers of investigating such things are very, very tangible. Susan Walsh apparently had numerous encounters with people who claimed to be the agents or managers of the dancers she was interviewing, telling her the dire consequences that would await her if she didn't cease publishing what she had learned from her investigations. Anyone who has watched The Sopranos knows that strip clubs in New Jersey, which happen to have more than any other state in the Union, are usually under mob control. Whatever faction controls each club can vary from area to area, some under Italian control and some under Russian. Dancers under the control of such clubs are occasionally used as bait in deals, which can make them even more vulnerable to violence and abuse than usual. Walsh once interviewed a club manager, referred to only as Marty, who said, "Some girls you don't see anymore. It's because these girls found something out or were let in on it, or maybe overheard a conversation about something that was going down. Then, if that girl wants to turn around and get out, they'll get rid of her, or whatever." Walsh had clearly involved herself with men who were not afraid to resort to murder to solve their problems. It was also rumored that her deep involvement in the investigation of vampire cults had also caused her to become romantically involved with someone who was convinced that they were themselves a vampire. But who exactly caused her untimely disappearance isn't clear whatsoever. All we know is that on July 16, 1996, Walsh left her son in the care of his father. Before leaving the Nutley apartment complex, she called home with the intention of running errands, to make a telephone call from a payphone across the street from her house. She was dressed in all black when she walked out into a scorching hot Tuesday morning. It was the last time she was seen alive. There was such little evidence as to who might have taken her that the Nutley Police Department declared the case closed just 6 weeks later. But it also is highly suspicious that when asked by police if they might conduct forensic tests in her apartment, her ex-husband Mark flat out refused. Apparently, this was on the advice of his lawyer, who insisted that such a search would make him suspect number one, given that, logically speaking, her hair and fingerprints would be all over his home. But still, what could he possibly have to hide? Regardless, it is absolutely terrifying that a well-known, world-like person could simply up and disappear outside of her own apartment block, and that no evidence and no body would ever be found.